It's very fitting that, as Lorraine said, the history of the indigenous people here goes back thousands of years, and we are honored to have their representative here today. So thank you, Prosper, for coming. That, getting a whole family here is amazing. So anyway, please come up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We were doing some of our tours of the old agency. Now, we're from the Nebraska band of the Waukon people, the Winnebago. And just to clarify, the name Winnebago is a derivative of some of our kind of hunting area enemies, and so it kind of stuck in some areas. But actually, the Ho-Chungra was one nation at one time, and they have I was trying to describe our original land base, which went down into the Illinois. But if you take a line from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and draw a straight line to the cross, Wisconsin, and then draw another straight line to mid-northeastern Illinois, and then connect that with Green Bay again, you kind of have an idea of where our land base encompassed originally. John Waukon, as everyone knows, who was the son of Waukon Haga, who was known as Waukon Decorah. He was my grandfather's grandfather. And he migrated down to Nebraska in the late around 1868. And he was camped outside of Waukon, Iowa, so the town had already been named for him. And he had 100 Winnebago warriors, and he had a 13-year-old son who was my grandfather's dad, Samuel Waukon. Now he was 80, they say 83 at this time. So he had a 13-year-old son. And then my grandfather said they lived in, people say wigwam, we call it a chipotle, it's a lodge. He wouldn't live in any other modern home, so him and my grandfather lived in there next to the home of my great-grandparents, Samuel and his wife. She was known as Queen Smith. And our name underwent a change then. 3 times in our history. And I used to listen to my grandfather, because we did the same thing in the summertime. We didn't have our own lodge, but he had an old army tent we set up, and I stayed there in the summer with him. He told me the same thing, and I had to memorize our oral history all the way in Wisconsin, the removals, the treaties, and our family lineage, the same way his grandfather made him who was John Waukon. And so my grandfather owned land, kind of similar to what we've been seeing around here, in northeastern Nebraska along the Missouri River. And my grandfather had timberland and farmland he leased out. And so I was privy to a lot of our ceremonies that we had. Our original one was a medicine lodge, the Native American church, and then some other things. So I grew up down there memorizing these things and doing a vision quest when I was 9 years old in the woods. And since then I've done a couple more, but so we kind of practiced that way. So that is kind of my background for our tribal history. Throughout my life I've traveled. I've lived in Minnesota about 27 years. I was very familiar with the Ojibwe nations, because some of their practices were similar in their lot. And I've been to Canada where there was different ceremonies I was exposed to there. So that's kind of an overview of it. And I used to discuss with David Lee Smith. He was in our way, he was my brother, and in what we call white man's way, he would have been my first cousin. But we would, he got his master's in UCLA. And I went to the University of St. Thomas and did postgraduate work in unrelated field of business and finance. And but I would always be in dispute with him on the names up here. The names. I said, he said, I write for academia. And I said, yeah, I know. I said, but you still got to get those names correct. So anyway, I remember he called Buzzard Decorah, who was the second son, who you refer to as Gloria in the morning. He referred to him as Buzzard Decorah, and I said, well, you might have had a relative named Buzzard, but I said, his real name was a white-breasted deer. But you gotta look at the spelling, because that word ska means white, and I said, and we were told to keep it in our line all the time. But as we were touring this, I've been up here, I first heard about Waukon, Iowa from my grandfather. Every summer around July, he'd get a letter from Waukon, Iowa. Some historic group would always say, we are inviting you to come up and be in our, we'll give you the keys to the city to participate in corn threshing days. And he said, next year we'll go up there. Next year. And so he began telling me about this area they called neutral ground. So I first heard about that when I was about 5. So the first time I came up here was when my daughter had our name changed back to Waukon. And she was about 8 years old at the time. And I told her about our lineage, because I tell all my grandkids, you gotta know that lineage and the names and everything. And I said, you're gonna learn it verbally. You know, you're gonna have to repeat it the same way I did. And so she knew about that. And our name at the time, John Waukon's son, Samuel Waukon, they were doing census then, and it was after the Dawes Act, and so they couldn't pronounce our names, our Ho-Chunk names. It's a complicated language. Even some other tribes say yours is one of the toughest languages because in the pronunciations. And so they said, okay, you gotta have you not only have to have an English surname, you have to have an English last name now. And Samuel said, well, what do you got? And they said, well, we've got Smith, Jones, and she said, all right, well, we'll take Smith. So it went from Samuel Waukon, and he took his dad, John Waukon's first name, so he became John Smith. And my grandfather, who was Walter Waukon, became George Smith. So in Nebraska, that was our name, Smith. And when I told my daughter that, she said, I don't like that name. why don't we change it back? And so I said, well, we gotta go to court. It's a lot of hassle. I said, but her grandfather did want us to change that. But when she was 8, we did just that. We changed it back to Waukon. And Waukon Decorah was the one that broke with the Decorah line, because his vision quest, his name was Waukon, and the yellow rattlesnake, as I see in your commemoration medal, that yellow rattlesnake was his power in battle. And so Waukon became Waukon, and because he came from the Decorah line, it was Waukon Decorah. But he was always taught through his leadership that it's always diplomacy first and war last. So he always tried to make diplomacy the bedrock of his legacy, and he passed that down to all of us. And as we were visiting some of the sites, my grandkids were talking amongst themselves, but what happened here, this is the first time we've been up there. They had a cultural shock that the interest in the Ho-Chunk people in this area was something you don't experience in some parts of the United States. You know, we're kind of used to the other ones. They already know who we are. They can tell us our own history. And they were shocked that there was such an interest here, you know, and it was such a big deal for them to see that. So I want to thank you for that welcoming they got, and they've all got their Ho-Chunk names. Some are during the Dawes Act, when they were doing blood quantums and stuff, I'm 60% Ho-Chungra and 25% Dakota and 15% French and Irish. So there was always that acknowledgement. So their names are related to the essence of how we name our children. So they're given that spirit. So anyway, that one of the things I mentioned yesterday to some of the people who were showing us around, I said, in order, one of our biggest differences is who we call white people, we call them Mahate. They have a Western type of thinking, and we have a indigenous type of thinking. And there has to be an understanding, you know, if they could ever come together. I said they could solve a lot of the issues that are plaguing this world today. But I said, the most important thing is we learn is that thinking is we think about the whole before we break it down into pieces, and it's the reverse the other way. They get the pieces, and they look at the whole, and I said that's kind of confusing to the way we think. So once we got the whole, we know. So I asked the people, I said, what would you like to know about, you know, in the talk tomorrow? Because, you know, there's so much, you know, there's specific issues, you know, and so I think I kind of got an idea from that gathering yesterday. So hopefully we can do justice to that tonight, and you know, but I wanted to thank you for considering us when you do your celebration. Also, it's kind of a celebration for us too. 175 years. My grandfather passed away 50 years ago in April. And so that was a big deal within our tribe because of everything he'd done in the tribe. He was a graduate of the Chief Waukon Indian School and the Moody Bible Institute. And he helped with the first Dutch Reformed Church in Winnebago. So he kind of did both. So, I guess is that 5 minutes? Okay, so thank you.
I apologize, I tried to say it right, but it should have been Waka Haka. I think I did the turnaround, I said Waka Haka. And I hope that doesn't mean anything bad in Ho-Chunk. Okay, I would like to now introduce